The day I found out my brother had co-signed a $380,000 business loan using my identity, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat completely still at my kitchen table. The bank's certified letter spread flat in front of me, and I thought about how he'd called me 2 weeks ago just to say he missed me. I should back up. My name is Lily. I'm 29 years old. I work as a licensed practical nurse at a regional hospital in Columbus, Ohio. And until about 6 months ago, I believed my family was just difficult, complicated. The kind of family where you learn early to keep your head down and your expectations low. Not abusive, not criminal. Just exhausting in that slow, grinding way that takes years before you recognize it for what it is. My brother Chad is 36, 7 years older than me, which always felt like more when we were growing up. He had this gravity to him, this confident older sibling energy that I spent my entire childhood trying to earn approval from. He was the one who taught me to drive. He was the one who showed up when my apartment flooded 3 years ago and helped me move boxes until 2 in the morning. He was the one I called first when my last relationship ended. He was also, apparently, the one who walked into a credit union in Westerville with documents bearing my forged signature and walked out with a $380,000 SBA-backed business loan in both our names. I didn't know any of that in the beginning. I found out the way a lot of people find out their lives have been quietly dismantled by accident. I was applying for a car loan at my own bank, nothing dramatic, just a used Honda Accord because my old one finally gave out. The loan officer pulled my credit, gave me this look, the kind that means something is wrong but she's not sure how to say it, and then she turned her screen toward me. My debt-to-income ratio was listed as catastrophic. There was a $380,000 commercial loan attached to my social security number, opened 14 months prior, currently 3 payments behind. I was sitting at work eating a sad granola bar for lunch. The hum of the HVAC system in the bank. The way the loan officer's pen was sitting at a perfect diagonal across her notepad. I remember thinking that there had to be a mistake. Identity theft happened to other people, strangers who clicked phishing links and didn't check their statements. Not to me, not by someone who knew my middle name and my childhood address and the exact way I take my coffee. I asked her to print everything she had. She did, quietly, without pushing me for an explanation. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine, and read through every page twice. The loan was for a business called Monarch Industrial Supplies LLC. I had never heard of it. The registered address was a suite at a UPS store location on the east side of Columbus. The co-signer on the loan, the person who had supposedly walked into that credit union with me and signed beside my name, was my brother. My information on those documents was perfect. Not close. Perfect. My full legal name, my social security number, my date of birth, my current employer, my salary, my home address, everything correct down to the last digit. There was a signature on page 9 that was supposed to be mine. It wasn't frantic or obviously wrong. It was careful, practiced. It looked like someone had spent real time getting it right. The drive home from the bank took 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock the entire way, focusing on the numbers to keep myself from doing something I couldn't take back. I need to tell you who Chad is because otherwise none of what came next will make sense. Chad has been starting businesses since he was in his 20s. A landscaping company that lasted 2 seasons. A gym equipment resale operation that dissolved in a dispute with a partner. A food truck concept that never made it past the planning stage. Each one had a story, a reason it didn't work, an external force that was ultimately to blame. The market wasn't right. His partner was unreliable. The timing was off. He was never without a next idea, a next pitch, a next opportunity that was going to be the one that finally clicked. My parents, for as long as I can remember, have been his most dedicated investors. Not officially. Not with paperwork. Just with the slow, steady flow of money that a family sends to the child they believe in most. My dad worked for the same manufacturing company for 31 years. My mom did bookkeeping part-time out of their home. They were not wealthy people. They were careful, methodical people who had saved their entire lives and spent a significant portion of it propping up Chad's revolving door of ambitions. I was sitting at work eating a sad granular phone. This Spadler one. The daughter who had a 401k at 24 and kept a budget in a spreadsheet and paid her taxes early. In my family, that wasn't admirable. It was just expected. Chad took risks. Lily handled things. That dynamic had cost me money before, but nothing like this. There had been times my parents called asking me to contribute to Chad's latest shortfall. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. Loan payments he couldn't cover. Utilities on a shop he was renting. Once a legal fee I never got a full explanation for. I gave what I could because saying no felt like choosing a side, and I was always told we didn't do that in this family. I had learned slowly to give less, to say I was tight on money even when I wasn't, to let their calls go to voicemail sometimes and return them a few hours later when I had prepared myself. I was not proud of the distance I had quietly constructed, but I understood on some level that it was the only way I was going to survive being related to them. None of that prepared me for a $380,000 loan. I didn't call Chad that night. I called my friend Meredith, who works in HR and has the specific gift of staying calm when I cannot. I read her everything from the bank printouts and she listened without interrupting, and when I finished she said, "Lily, you need to call a lawyer before you call anyone in your family. Tonight if you can. Tomorrow morning at the latest." I found an attorney through the Ohio State Bar's referral line. Her name was Ms. Whitfield, and she had a measured, factual way of speaking that I found steadying in a situation where nothing else was. I sent her photos of the documents before our call, and when we spoke, she confirmed what I already knew but hadn't wanted to say out loud. What had been done to me was a federal crime: bank fraud, identity theft. Wire fraud, potentially, given that the application had been submitted electronically. She outlined what reporting would involve, what the timeline typically looked like, and what I should and should not do before we filed anything official. She told me not to contact Chad yet. I lasted 2 days. I was sitting at bus about the tip because I think it matters. I knew what I was supposed to do. I had a lawyer telling me to wait, and I still picked up the phone on a Tuesday morning because a part of me, the part that remembered him helping me move furniture, the part that had 7 years of older brother mythology built up around him, needed to hear him say it wasn't what it looked like. He answered on the second ring, cheerful, normal, asked me how my week was going. I told him I'd gotten a letter from a bank. The silence on the other end was a different kind of silence than the one I'd sat in at my kitchen table. That one was still. This one had weight to it. I could hear him breathing. "Which bank?" he finally said. "Not what letter, not is everything okay, which bank?" "Our Whole Valley Credit Union," I said, "about Monarch Industrial Supplies." Another pause. Then he exhaled slowly and his voice shifted into something I recognized from childhood, the tone he used when he was recalibrating, when the original story wasn't going to hold and he needed a new one. "Lily, I was going to talk to you about this." "When?" When things were more settled. The business is doing well. We're just in a cash flow issue right now. It's temporary." "Chad," my voice came out flat. I hadn't planned it that way. "You used my identity. You forged my signature on a federal loan application. I used your information as a formality. The loan was always going to be paid from the business. You were never going to see a single bill. I was sitting at bed. 3 payments are past due. It is on my credit report. It is destroying my credit score. This is not a formality." He pivoted again. He was good at that. He told me the business had hit a rough patch, that he'd needed a co-signer and hadn't wanted to ask me directly because he knew I'd say no, that he'd planned to refinance and get my name off the loan by the time I ever found out. He said he would have told me eventually. He said he was handling it. I asked him if our parents knew. The pause this time was longer. "Mom helped with some of the documentation," he said carefully. "I don't know exactly what happened to me in that moment. I know I stayed on the phone. I know my voice didn't break. I know I asked him 2 or 3 more questions, practical ones, about amounts and dates. And I know that when I hung up, I sat on my kitchen floor, not the couch, the floor, with my back against the cabinet, for about 20 minutes before I was able to think clearly again. My mother had helped with the documentation. She had my social security number memorized. Of course she did. Every mother does. She'd filled out my college financial aid forms, my health insurance paperwork when I turned 18, my tax returns the first 2 years I filed. She had everything she needed, and she had given it to my brother, and together they had signed my name to a debt I never agreed to carry. I called Miss Whitfield that afternoon and told her what Chad had said. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's an admission. Don't contact either of them again until we filed the fraud report." We filed it the next morning. I was sitting at work eating a sad granola bar for lunch because people always imagine it as one dramatic moment, and it isn't. It's paperwork. It's a report to the Federal Trade Commission through their identitytheft.gov portal. It's a call to the credit union's fraud department where I spoke with a woman who took down my account of events methodically and without any visible reaction, as if she heard this story weekly, which she probably did. It's a fraud alert placed on my credit file with all 3 bureaus. It's a certified letter sent to the business address listed on the loan, that UPS store suite, declaring in writing that my signature had been forged and that I was disputing all liability. It's a conversation with an FBI field office because Miss Whitfield believed this met the threshold for federal investigation given the loan amount and the interstate elements of the application. It is slow and procedural and nothing like what you see on television. My parents called 3 times while I was in the middle of all of it. I let them go to voicemail. My mother's first message was gentle. She said she'd heard I was upset and she wanted to talk things through. The second was less gentle. She said she didn't understand why I was making this into such a big thing when the loan was going to be paid back and I was going to come out of this fine. The third was my father, quiet and careful, saying he hoped I would call before things went any further. Things had already gone further. We had already filed. They showed up at my apartment on a Thursday evening. I know because I was on a call with Ms. Whitfield's paralegal when my building's intercom buzzed and I looked at the camera feed on my phone and saw both of them standing outside my door. I finished my call, then I went downstairs. I did not let them in. We stood in a small lobby near the mailboxes under the fluorescent light that always flickers slightly, and I looked at my parents, my 61-year-old father and my 58-year-old mother, and I tried to find something to say that was honest without being cruel. My mother spoke first. She said Chad needed this. She said the business was real this time, that he had real clients, that he just needed to get through a difficult patch. She said I had always had it easier than I admitted, that I had a good job and benefits and no one depending on me, and that family means something. I, sitting as sad Renew, gave him my social security number. She said, "You would never have agreed if we'd asked." I had thought about that sentence probably 1,000 times since that night. The logic of it, the way it was delivered without any apparent awareness of how it sounded. You would never have agreed if we'd asked, so we didn't ask, as if the problem wasn't the crime, but that I would have objected to it. My father looked at the floor when she said it. I told them both quietly that I had already reported the fraud to the credit union, to the FTC, and to federal investigators, that I had an attorney, that I was not going to withdraw any of those reports, that I loved them and I was not doing this out of anger, and that last part was the truest thing I said that night, because I wasn't angry in the hot, immediate way. I was something colder and sadder than angry. I was grieving something I hadn't fully named yet. My mother started to cry. She said I was tearing the family apart. I said Chad tore the family apart when he forged my name. I would walk upstairs. I sat on the floor again for a while. Then I made dinner, ate it at my kitchen table, and went to bed. The investigation moved in the slow way that federal things move. I checked in with Miss Whitfield every few weeks. The credit union froze the loan account, pending the fraud inquiry. The business, Monarch Industrial Supplies, had real clients, as my mother had said. But the revenue had never been anywhere near what the loan application claimed. Chad had inflated his projections significantly. That was a separate issue from the forgery, but it compounded everything. My credit score had dropped far enough to affect me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I ended up leasing a car instead of buying because the financing terms I qualified for were punishing. I had been planning to buy a condo that spring, nothing elaborate, a two-bedroom in a neighborhood I'd been watching for 2 years, and that was now on hold indefinitely. I am not describing this as tragedy. Other people have had worse things happen over less, but I want to be clear that the consequences were complete and ongoing, not hypothetical. I did not speak to Chad for 4 months. My parents called occasionally, and I answered sometimes. The conversations were careful and surface level, like talking to people you used to know well and no longer trust with anything real. My father seemed diminished in some way. I found hard to look at directly. My mother had shifted from crying to a kind of efficient, purposeful anger, as if the situation was still something that could be argued into a different shape if she found the right words. Meredith checked in on me regularly, a colleague from my unit at the hospital. A man named Dennis, who had been through something adjacent with his own family years ago, took me to lunch and sat with me for 3 hours talking through the specific grief of loving people who have done something you cannot excuse. That lunch was more useful than most things. I kept working. I kept my routine. I ran 4 mornings a week on the trail near my apartment, and there was something clarifying about that. About putting one foot in front of the other in the early morning before the city was fully awake, when it was just me and the sound of my own breathing. 6 months after I filed the initial reports, Miss Whitfield called me on a Tuesday afternoon. Chad had been formally charged. Bank fraud, identity theft, making false statements on a federal loan application. My mother had been named as a co-conspirator in the forgery portion for providing and attesting to the fraudulent documentation. I sitting at work eating a sad vanilla bar for lunch. My attorney gave me space to do that. She didn't push for a reaction. She just waited. I asked what the likely outcomes were. She gave me realistic ranges. Federal fraud at that amount typically carries significant sentencing guidelines, though cooperation and first-time status affect the final numbers. My mother's involvement was considered less direct, which would be factored in. I did not feel triumphant. I want to say that clearly because I know that's what people expect from this kind of ending. I didn't feel satisfied or relieved in any immediate way. I felt exhausted and very quiet. I thought about my brother teaching me to parallel park in an empty lot when I was 16, how patient he'd been, how he'd laughed every time I overcollected instead of getting frustrated. I thought about the person he had been then and tried to understand how the same person had done what he did, and I couldn't fully close that gap. Maybe I never will. What I did feel underneath all of it was something I can only describe as solid, like a floor I could stand on. I had not let it go to protect the peace. I had not quietly absorbed a $380,000 debt because family means something. I had not let my mother's tears or my father's silence or my brother's smooth, practiced recalibration talk me into believing that what happened to me was a formality. I phoned the phones. I got an attorney. I protected myself. The condo fell through. I am still venting. My credit is recovering, slower than I'd like, faster than I feared. I still run in the mornings. I is sitting at work eating a sad granola bar for lunch, when then is sometimes, and talk about the specific way that family can love you and damage you in the same breath. My parents are going through something I can see from a distance but no longer feel responsible for fixing. My mother has gotten a public defender. My father calls about once a month, and the calls are short. And there are long stretches of silence, and I am learning to sit in those silences without rushing to fill them. Chad hasn't called since the charges were filed. I don't expect him to. I keep the certified letter in a folder in my desk drawer, not as a memento or a reminder. Just because I haven't decided what to do with it yet, someday I'll probably shred it. For now, it's just a piece of paper. It's just documentation of a thing that happened and a thing I did about it. I am still here. I am still fine. That turns out to be enough. I sitting at work, desk at work, eating a store sweet sometimes. That little rented mailbox address listed as the headquarters of Monarch Industrial Supplies. A business built on my name, my credit, my social security number, and no one ever thought I'd find out. Or maybe they thought I'd find out and do nothing. That part I'm still not sure about. What I know is this. The consequences Chad and my mother are facing right now are not something I chose for them. They chose them a long time before I ever got that certified letter in the mail. Cause and effect doesn't care about family loyalty. It doesn't make exceptions for good intentions or cash flow problems or the fact that your brother once taught you to parallel park. Actions have weight. That weight lands somewhere eventually. It landed here. I was sitting that when a good person meant absorbing things quietly, keeping the peace, not making it worse. I gave money I couldn't really spare because saying no felt selfish. I would phone calls go unanswered and told myself that was just managing my stress, not acknowledging that something was deeply wrong. I was so busy being agreeable that almost agreed my way into $380,000 of fraudulent debt. What changed me wasn't anger. It was clarity. The moment I sat in that bank parking lot reading those printouts, something in me stopped negotiating with the version of events my family preferred. I stopped asking whether I was being too sensitive or too rigid or not loyal enough. I looked at the documents and I understood what they were and I understood what I had to do and I did it. That's not a small thing. A lot of people don't get there. I've talked to enough people, dentists, friends, strangers in comment sections to know that the hardest part of this kind of situation isn't the legal process. It's deciding that you are worth protecting, that your name, your credit, your future are not reasonable collateral for someone else's ambitions, even if that someone is your brother, even if your mother is crying, even if your father is looking at the floor. Ms. Whitfield gave me the legal framework. Meredith gave me the steadiness to make the first call. But the decision was mine, and I had to make it with my own conscience, not anyone else's permission. I think about the person I was at 22, who would have quietly agreed to be a co-signer if Chad had asked directly, who would have told herself it was fine, that family sticks together, that she'd figured it out. That version of me didn't have enough information yet. She hadn't learned that real loyalty runs in both directions and that people who love you don't forge your signature on federal loan applications. I'm not bitter. I want to be clear about that because bitterness would mean I was still waiting for something, an apology, an acknowledgement, a different ending. I'm not waiting. I filed the reports. I protected my credit. I kept going to work and running my morning miles and eating dinner at my own kitchen table. That's the whole of it. You can love your family and still hold them accountable. Those two things are not opposites. That's the thing nobody tells you when you're growing up in a house where keeping the peace is treated like a virtue. Peace that requires you to disappear isn't peace. It's just silence with better PR. I'm still here. That turns out to be the whole point.